I caught the reading bug when I was about 11, and we didn't have a lot of money, but when I was 11, a paperback novel was 50 cents. So it didn't take a lot. But she had been a member of the Book of the Month Club, and there was a trunk full of her old books in the basement, and I went right through them. So I didn't make any kind of a distinction between children's books and adult books. And then I started buying my own books at the local bookstore. And one day, the principal took one of my books away from me. I was reading The Carpetbaggers by Harold Robbins, and this was in 7th grade in a Lutheran school. This prompted a parent-teacher conference. And my mother duly came up to school, and I was sitting in the principal's office with her, and he lays the book on the desk and said, you know that your son was reading this? And she said, no, I didn't. And he goes, well, and he waited, and she said, well, what? He says, well, do you think this is appropriate? And she looked at it, and she says, well, if he can't handle it, he won't read it. And I'll thank you not to censor what my son reads. It took a while for the lesson to sink in, but ultimately it was, you should not keep things from people, and people will actually filter on their own. Kids, well, you have to leaven certain things. Obviously, you can't hand a 12-year-old James Joyce and expect him to make anything of it. But my mother became a hero at that point. My other heroes, oh heavens, Carl Sagan was a hero. Not for the usual reasons. There was a writer in the 50s named Immanuel Velikovsky who wrote a couple of books that are, an acquaintance of mine characterized them as great cosmic drama, Worlds in Collision, and there were a couple of others, and he took a really interesting tack on explaining all of the events in Genesis and Exodus according to planets shifting position in the solar system and comets coming through, and he had done a marvelously imaginative body of work explaining everything that had happened in Egypt according to these celestial phenomena. And the book is a real hoot. And it's really bad science, but it was really interesting. Now, when it came out, however, the National Science Foundation, I'm not sure if there was a National Science Foundation at the time, but the powers that be in the sciences declared it scientific heresy. And it was one of the worst examples in this country of scientific blackballing ever. School districts were threatened that they'd better not buy this book because certain teachers, certain book publishing companies would not offer them. It was a debacle. It was awful. He was thoroughly censored by the scientific community. And Carl Sagan came along later and said, this is really crappy what we did. Why don't we just have a conference and examine the book on its merits? And it did. The conference took place. I think the conference took place in 1960, 61, something like that. And there was a book produced called Velikovsky Reconsidered. And basically the conference decided that Immanuel Velikovsky was a lousy scientist and none of this stuff made any sense. However, he'd made a couple of suggestions in the book that pointed the way for new research. And in particular with regard to Venus. There were things that Velikovsky predicted about the planet Venus that everybody said, oh, that's nonsense, and they turned out to be true. Not for the reasons that Velikovsky thought they'd be true, but it prompted people to go look. And Sagan just said, maybe this guy is a crackpot, but we had no right to do this, and we should look at all ideas, at least initially, for what they are. I find that heroic. I have very few heroes otherwise. I have people that I admire, but hero to me is is kind of an iconic label that most people don't fit into. People do heroic things. They are not in themselves heroes. There are writers who I admire their work, and their personal lives are terrible. They're a shambles. I often tell students, if you really like somebody's work, don't find out anything about them. It could color your perceptions and cripple your appreciation of the one thing that they do well. So I can't really think of too many people that I consider heroes. And I've had heroes in the past who turned out to be ridiculous, so I tend to be very critical about that. Mark Twain was a hero, I suppose you could say.